Thank you very much, Transitional Justice Center and Joanna for inviting me, and also for this very generous introduction. Let me see here. Can you see? Okay. So today's work, which is still actually in its sort of preliminary phase, is about parliamentary commissions of inquiry in Turkey, and I'll explain where this is coming from in a minute. So I have conducted sort of all the textual analysis with the content of the commissions, but I haven't been able to interview anybody quite yet. So here it is, the outline. So I would like to talk a little bit about the theoretical framework, why we're talking about parliamentary commissions of inquiry today. So what are they? Why do they matter? Give some examples from the literature from around the world, and also draw some lessons. And then I would like to provide the context of modern Turkey a little bit with respect to the need for transitional justice. It's going to be brief, but if there is anything that you would like to learn more about, please feel free to stop me or ask in the Q&A. And then I am going to share my analysis of 4 commissions of inquiry in Turkey from 1996 to 2013. These are the 4 commissions that have elements of transitional justice, that address issues having to do with democracy or human rights. And then I'm hoping to conclude with some suggestions for steps forward. Now, one thing I would like to say is that I am going to eventually share my findings with an NGO in Turkey, the Memory Center, and so my research coming into sort of this topic was more, how to put it, more NGO oriented. So trying to find some best practices out of parliamentary commissions of inquiry, and less academic in nature. So first of all, what are parliamentary commissions of inquiry? It's an ad hoc panel, so a panel that is established for a temporary period of time for a specific purpose, that is created, staffed by members of a legislative body to investigate an incident or series of incidents of public interest. Membership can be limited to legislators or a mixed panel of legislators and outside experts. And some of these commissions also invite outside witnesses to give testimony. Now, parliamentary commissions are not exactly truth commissions in the sense that they are selected, or the members are selected from within a legislative body rather than from independent experts. They are also not NGO panels. I mean, they have this sort of official attribute. And again, they're ad hoc, so they're not memory institutions or anything like that. They're established for a brief period of time. Now, they of course share a lot of characteristics with these other truth-finding measures, though. So what makes them unique is that I think, well, what makes them not unique is that they are essential to discovering, publicizing, interpreting facts about socially and politically important events and processes. Now, they are meant to be spaces of political contention and disagreement by design. So they're partisan. And again, that is by design. That's intended. So this is both a risk and an opportunity. It's a risk because they're less likely than truth commissions or civil society efforts to operate independently of changing political circumstances. But they typically have greater power to force public institutions to share information and for individuals to testify. So that is sort of the trade-off, I think, with addressing past wrongs through parliamentary commissions of inquiry. And of course, most countries, pretty much all countries, have that have functioning parliaments, have some mechanism for establishing commissions of inquiry. In presidential systems, of course, presidential commissions of inquiry could steal the show a little bit, but as we know, with the congressional commissions in the United States, most recently the Coup attempt commission for investigating the January 6th events. The parliamentary commissions of inquiry could be quite important, and they could be really popular with the public. Now, some examples from the transitional justice literature. I'm not going to get into the details, but of course, it's always questionable whether a parliamentary commission of inquiry is a truth commission or not. Again, I believe that there are some essential differences, and that a parliamentary commission should be seen as its own thing. But the commissions that you see here have been, time and again, labeled truth commissions as well, because again, they conduct similar forensic investigation. They they perform functions like fact-finding, but also sort of narrative truth-telling, quite similar to truth commissions. So the Uruguayan one, the Peruvian one, are two in Latin America that have, well, in their day, made headlines. The two German commissions, after the end of the East German regime, were also seen broadly as a truth commission-like bodies. And again, if you have any questions, I would like to address them later. Now, these commissions all have sort of produced different effects. The Uruguayan Commission did not satisfy the demand for justice and accountability in Uruguay at the time. And civil society kept pressuring governments for establishing a new truth commission, which happened 17 years later. So in some ways, the omissions of the Uruguayan Commission actually was the reason why civil society kept pushing. The Peruvian Commission was interesting. It was established after a prison massacre that involved state agents. And the president of that commission, or the chairman of that commission, was a leftist senator who actually did a pretty decent job. So much so that the members of the commission from the government party basically didn't participate in the publication of the final report. And so they published their own report. So there is sort of the official report that was more to the left of what the government wanted to see. And then government MPs sort of delivered their own unofficial report. The two German commissions are generally seen as Germany's major mechanisms for coming to terms with the East German past, of course, alongside lustration policies. There was definitely some political division between the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. And it seems that the Christian Democrats were very interested in sort of not only criticizing the East German dictatorship, but generally making the point that sort of socialism as an ideology was at the root of the problems, which of course the Social Democrats didn't necessarily want to agree with. So a certain degree of divisiveness existed there as well. So all in all, some lessons from other places around the world. Some commissions of inquiry managed to produce a coherent report despite political fragmentation, so as in the case of Germany, while others simply reinforced political polarization by publishing multiple reports containing divergent conclusions, as I described in the case of Peru. The relationship between parliamentary commissions and other truth-finding initiatives is complex. So the 2001 Truth Commission in Peru actually confirmed the findings of the 1987 Commission, whereas in the case of Uruguay, actually civil society efforts were meant to rectify the omissions of a commission. So all in all, some best practices, which I think apply to truth commissions generally as well. Well, if possible, a commission should enjoy sufficient time and resources, should be representative of parties and ideologies rather than exclusionary, should have clear mandate and goals, should make formal recommendations for future prosecution and change in policy and legislation. And finally, human rights organizations, civic groups, and media organizations should monitor the Commission's work closely. I think these are fairly non-controversial best practices, but of course, the politics of establishing and operating a parliamentary commission of inquiry typically work, well, sometimes work to sort of reinforce these goals, but typically at odds with these best practices. Now I'll jump into the Turkish case. So for those of you who don't know much about Turkey's political system, Turkey has been a constitutional republic since 1923. There was a constitution going back to 1876 in the Ottoman Empire. And the country had a limited experience with multi-candidate elections during the Ottoman times, but the Constitutional Republic was established in 1923. And multi-party elections with at least minimal fairness standards exist since 1950, with a few interruptions, but basically sort of never entirely eliminated. Turkey had a parliamentary system until 2018, and then under pressure from current president, the country adopted through a referendum a presidential system. So parliament still exists, but its authorities are curtailed dramatically. And the country has a unicameral legislature, so there is no Senate. There was a Senate between 1961 and 1980, but it was abolished. Well, it was established after a military coup, and then it was abolished after another military coup, which brings us to the next slide. There have been interruptions of democracy in Turkey. There were two military coups, two military interventions that were short of a coup, in which the military basically forced a civilian government to resign. There were, well, several coup attempts, but sort of the most famous or infamous ones in 1962 and 2016. So military intervention into politics is common. There hasn't been a very long period of military dictatorship, but there have been these interruptions. The rule of law has not been fully in place, wasn't and isn't, really. There are serious ongoing human rights violations. To add to that, there is an ongoing internal armed conflict in the Kurdish region with an insurgency called the PKK, Kurdistan Workers' Party, since 1984. Now, Turkey has had periods of liberalization, as you can see from that graph there, but there has never been a formal process of transitional justice. Now, the data for that graph was taken from the varieties of democracy data set, and it's the liberal democracy score. So you can see that there have been periods of democratization, but also interruptions, major interruptions with coups in 1960 and 1980. And since 2007 or 8, it's going down. And again, I know this is a sort of a very short crash course in Turkish political history. So like, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to address later. Now then, parliamentary commissions of inquiry in Turkey. There have been 137 of them in the past 70 years or so, almost 2 per year. Now, 89 out of 137 submitted a final report to the plenary of the parliament. That's 2/3. In other words, 1/3 didn't submit a final report, or the final report wasn't delivered or heard in the plenary. Now, most of them are about other things, things other than democracy and human rights. Again, the sky is the limit with respect to the topics. Some of them are about agriculture, some of them are about abuse of drugs, you name it. 2 of them were about coups and coup attempts, one of which I will talk about. And then 3 of them were about unresolved politically motivated murders. And of course, a number of commissions addressed fundamental rights, but the term human rights has never been in the title of a parliamentary commission of inquiry in Turkey. That graph shows the number of parliamentary commission per legislative term. The typical legislative term in Turkey is 4 to 5 years. So elections used to be held every 5 years, and then it was reduced to 4. The thing, though, is that as far as I can remember, there's almost never been sort of full completion of the term, definitely not since the 80s. so the average term is somewhere between 3 to 4 years. And so that's the breakdown per not only term, but you see those white lines, that's the separation line per year in term. Now, also in Turkey, there are sub-commissions of permanent parliamentary commissions. So Turkey has had a permanent human rights commission in its parliament since 1990, and they do publish reports. Now, this is important because one of the reports that I'm going to talk about is actually a sub-commission report. And to my surprise, I couldn't find any summary of this commission's work in the digital archives. It seems that they are not keeping records, or at least they are not digitizing them. Now, I'll move on. What's important here, I think, is that, so why am I studying parliamentary commissions of inquiry in Turkey? There is a tendency to think about these commissions as not really doing great work. And in some ways, I will conclude that that's partly true. Actually, that's true to a great extent. However, as we're going to see, these parliamentary commissions have sometimes managed to push the official narrative forward in unanticipated ways. Again, they haven't necessarily revolutionized politics or society, but they have definitely made their limited contributions to the debate on democracy and human rights in Turkey. And so, again, I didn't expect much from these commissions as major transitional justice tools. But I think in some ways they have at least contributed in minimal ways to the public debate in Turkey. So I'm only looking into commissions that address human rights violations, including politically motivated murders, which is a huge problem in Turkey. A large number of intellectuals, politicians were assassinated throughout Turkish history, and typically the murderers are not known, or at least the organization behind the murders is not known, especially when the internal armed conflict in the Kurdish region escalated. A lot of civilians were also murdered this way. So the violent conflict is another subject matter that I'm looking into. And finally, coups and other military interventions are also my subject matter. So I identify 4 commissions. Again, 3 of them ad hoc commissions, and 1 of them is a sub-commission report. And the first one is about an incident that has revealed the mafioso links, organized crime linkages in Turkey in the 1990s. The second one is about violations of the right to life in the context of what is called terrorism and violence between 2011 and 2013. The third one is about coups and other military interventions in Turkey dating 2012. And by the way, that's a mouthful, the name of that commission. I think they were trying to say something there. They were trying to say something to the effect that there are so many ways in which the military has intervened into politics that we don't even know how to name them. But yeah, so, and then finally, during the peace process, a short-lived peace process between the Turkish state and the PKK, there was a commission established to seek ways to manage nonviolent conflict resolution, and that one dates to 2013. So, starting with the first one, the context of that commission was human rights violations in the context of the internal armed conflict. So what happened was that in late 1996, in a western town, there was a car accident, and in the car accident were 4 people. A member of the parliament who was known as sort of managing a paramilitary village guard organization in the Kurdish region, a police chief, and then an ultranationalist crime boss and his girlfriend. Now this ultranationalist sort of criminal was under an arrest warrant for a crime that he had committed 20 years ago, which was the cold-blooded murder of 7 leftist students in Turkey. And then he escaped the country. He was in a Swiss jail for drug-related charges. Somehow he managed to escape the Swiss prison cell. So he was all over the place, and clearly he was colluding with politicians. And so all of that was revealed in an accident. And so there was so much public pressure to reveal the facts of what happened that a commission was established with 9 members, 5 from the party, from government parties. It was a coalition between a right-wing party and the Islamist right party at the time, and 4 from the opposition. Now, the commission interviewed 54 individuals, most of them active or retired members of police and military institutions or individuals with connections to organized crime. 13 of the 54 were actually interviewed in jails or prisons. Now, to my surprise, there were no interviews with victims of human rights violations. Again, these mafioso links had a lot to do with the internal armed conflict and the execution of the extrajudicial crimes during the time. And somehow this was not a major part of the conversation in the commission. Now, I analyzed the final report, and I'm going to show a visual in a minute. It was forensic in tone. So actually it reads like a crime thriller more than anything else. It had a collection of claims about organized crime. It doesn't necessarily conclude any of the investigations. So it doesn't ever say, well, we know that this person murdered this other person. It's always somebody said this and this other person said this other thing. And so there is really never any concluding. There are very few conclusions about why and how organized crime infiltrated politics. And then finally, the recommendations chapter basically wants the state to address institutional weaknesses and so institute broad reform. Now, the final report was indeed discussed by the plenary of the parliament, but during that time, the military basically intervened to force the Islamist government to resign. It's a bit of a complicated case because that government was not very happy with this commission either, despite the fact that its chair was sort of quite involved with the work of the commission and was quite independent of the party line. With that said, to this day, there are rumors about why the military intervened, because that intervention sort of shifted the terms of the political polarization in Turkey to Islamism versus secularism debate, which went on for quite a bit longer. And so this organized crime dimension was lost to the media for a long time. So some say that the military basically calculated that and they didn't want sort of the findings of this commission and findings in the media to make headlines anymore. I mean, it's hard to really prove or disprove that, but the net effect is that that's exactly what happened. And so the issues talked about in this commission basically had to wait for another decade before they could sort of be discussed in the public. And I should say that none of the major crimes addressed by the commission have been prosecuted sort of properly and with proper punishment to this day. So here is the narrative framing of the Susurluk, the commission that I just described. Susurluk is the name of the municipality where the accident happened. Now, for those of you who speak Turkish, that's a treat, the word cloud. But so what I would like to say is that the major words that are there are entirely about defendants and the names of certain sort of mafioso types and the police and things like that. On the right, you can also see the issues being discussed in the commission. Its framing is a lot. How to say this? Its framing really emphasizes organized crime, drugs and gambling and arms smuggling and things like that. When it comes to human rights or the Kurdish issue or unresolved murders, somehow that's secondary to the framing of the commission. And I think that is in many ways a chance that was missed by the commission. You know, we can talk about this more later. I'll move on to the next commission, But before moving on, you can note that, well, there's a time lag of 14 years. What happened in that time period? There were a number of coalition governments in the 1990s. In 2002, the Justice and Development Party and its leader, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, came to power. And then they won 3 elections. So they had 3 straight election victories in 2002, 2007, and 2011. And so in many ways, they consolidated their rule until a period of heightened tension with the military and the judiciary between 2005 and 2010. Now, in other words, the second commission, the Human Rights Subcommission, was established in the heyday of that party's government. And as of 2011, the violence in the Kurdish region had not abated. And there was a number of comprehensive, well, more like a number of studies of casualties and the death toll in the region, from the police institution, coming from the military, coming from human rights organizations, but that data had not been compiled. And so that's what this subcommission did. Now, they had 7 members, 4 from the AKP government and 3 from the opposition, so the sort of the secular, social democratic Republican People's Party, the ultranationalist Nationalist Action Party, and the Kurdish Political Movements Party. Well, the Constitutional Court kept banning Kurdish parties, so they keep changing names. At the time, their name was Independent Democracy Party, but again, today they have a different name. So also 54 interviews with journalists, human rights activists, victim survivors, relatives of the disappeared, and politicians. So in that regard, I think it comes very close to a truth commission. Actually, the list of people they interviewed was quite impressive. And again, these are taboo subjects. I mean, interviewing victim survivors who were targeted by the state, it was in many ways a taboo at the time. I mean, when it comes to an official investigation. Now, the final report provides a description of the death toll of the internal armed conflict. So about 8,000 state security forces, 22,000 insurgents, and more than 5,500 civilians were murdered in the context of the internal armed conflict. There were also the final report talks about the origins of the violent conflict. Now, the framing of the final report basically takes the concept of terrorism as its sort of operative term. So it doesn't talk about internal armed conflict, civil war, any such term. It says these are crimes or these are casualties that took place because of terrorism. And its definition of terrorism is basically any act of non-state violence that is politically motivated. It does not see state terrorism as a possibility, and also it does not necessarily distinguish between non-terrorism, violence that is not of a terroristic nature. So violence that doesn't, target civilians. Now, the casualty figures were widely used in the academia and media. Human rights groups saw this as a first step, despite the failure to identify individual and institutional responsibility. So the final report was really walking a fine line there between saying that the state also did problematic things, and that's sort of their framing. They use concepts like problematic things, but they did not identify either any individuals or any institutions that were behind state violence. And so in that way, it probably, I would say, fell short of what many truth commissions would do. Moving forward, right around the same time, the Parliament also established an ad hoc commission to investigate coups and coup attempts. This was in the context of allegations of a coup plot organized by some militant secularist groups. And then these people were prosecuted by pro-government prosecutors. And if you want to get into the details of Turkish politics, at the time, the AKP government had these allies, the Gülen movement, which was sort of this religious / political / business group. And they had done a successful job of packing the courts with their loyalists. And so it was argued that they were the ones sort of who were going after the alleged coup plot. Just fast forward a couple of years later, the AKP government and the Gülen community basically fell out. And so after that, the Gülenists were the ones who ended up sort of being prosecuted. And so this line of prosecution was no longer pursued. But again, that's out of detail. So this commission had 17 members, 10 from the government and 7 from multiple parties of the opposition. This one really reads like more like an academic text more than anything. So there's a historical analysis of coups. It doesn't conduct any forensic investigation. It has a reasonably long bibliography, something that you don't see very often in a parliamentary commission. And in the end, they interviewed over 160 people, just about anybody you can name in Turkish politics or media, really. And they had a comprehensive account of coups and other military interventions. Now, at the end of the day, the final report was not discussed by the plenary of the parliament. And then, for reasons that I just described, the prosecutions of the alleged coup plot, they were all dropped. What is more, in 2016, there was an actual coup attempt, and maybe some of you remember it. And that coup attempt was associated with the members of the Gülen community, the AKP's former allies, who were in the military. And so that, of course, changed the discourse entirely. The language that you get in the 2012 coup commission doesn't prepare the public at all for what happened in July 2016. And so with that change of discourse, this coup commission's work basically fell out of favor. Actually, after that coup, the 2016 coup attempt, there was another coup commission to investigate only that attempt. And then that one was sort of dropped as well, because I think the AKP government realized that if there's going to be any serious investigation of the coup, many of them were sort of long allies with the Gülen movement, and so sort of that investigation was thrown aside as well. And finally, the Peace Process Commission. So there were peace negotiations between the Turkish state and the PKK. That's a mistake. December 2012 and July 2015. So for 2.5 years. It was the first time that a publicly announced process of negotiations took place in a conflict that by then had been going on for 28 years. Now, the peace negotiations coincided with the deterioration of democracy and the rule of law around 2013, if not before. For those of you who remember the Gezi protests in a park in Istanbul, that was in the summer of 2013. And so it was a very sort of complicated context. Talking about what happened in Turkey between 2013, 2014, 2015 would take several days. So I'll skip that for now. But that was the context in which this commission met. There were 11 members, 10 members from government and 1 from the Kurdish political movement. The Republican People's Party didn't send any members, saying that this commission would have been helpful before initiating negotiations with the PKK, not during. And then the Nationalist Action Party didn't send anybody. There were 42 interviews, and interestingly, they included a former PKK member, a veteran who was injured, some peace activists, people who were victimized by the PKK, some people who were victimized by the state. I think the commissioners were trying to strike some sort of a moral balance between those who were hurt by the insurgency and those who were hurt by the state. Now, the final report again reads like an academic text more than anything else. There are references to conflict resolution methods in Indonesia, in Colombia, in Northern Ireland. And so, there is definitely that intellectual dimension. And then there are also numerous suggestions to end the violent conflict. Now, at the end of the process, the Kurdish political movement basically said that their one member was not consulted in the drafting of the final report, and so they released a separate report that emphasizes sort of a more transformative understanding of conflict resolution than the official one. Now, the commission was largely ignored during the political crises of 2013-14, and then once the negotiations collapsed in 2015, well, nobody really remembers the peace process commission. Again, going back, the commission's work was, I mean, it was problematic for sure, but it had some elements that could be salvaged. It was probably the first time that any official document was sort of so serious about talking about non-violent conflict resolution in Turkey, for starters. But yeah, that's the sort of the post-commission process. Now, to conclude. In terms of coming to terms with the past in Turkey, I can't say the parliament has done nothing. They've done something, but it's not quite sufficient, as I have discussed throughout the presentation. Now, the period after 2014 has seen a gradual elimination of the parliament's authority. In 2014, Erdogan was elected president. In Turkey, the presidency was largely a symbolic office. But of course, he wanted to be a powerful president with extraordinary powers. And so he kept pushing the system towards that direction. And of course, since 2018, he got what he wanted, at least for the time being. Now, by the way, I should say in the present, the opposition is making some headways. There is a chance that they might capture political power in the near future, and they want to go back to the parliamentary system. So the parliament's role in the country's governing structure might change in a couple of years. Now, some recommendations. Civil society should be involved in drafting the mandate and supporting commissions for sure. Leaving that to politicians, I think is problematic. They are not necessarily interested in democracy and human rights. Even when they are interested, they could be distracted, or they might not know enough. And so I think concerned sectors should be more active from the get-go. The methodology should be deliberate and transparent. So I told you about how several commissions interviewed people, they read some books, they visited some places. It's not clear why they did any of that and how they used the data. And this is not, just a social scientist being arrogant here. It's just that it's really missing an important chance when you talk to so many victim survivors, so many civil society activists, and then in the final report, you don't see any of that. So I think more should be done to connect the methodology to the findings. Now, there is definitely a negotiation between fact-finding and platforming or sort of narrative truth-telling. Many of these commissions use reported speech all the time. So in 700 pages, 500 of them are reported speech of this person said this, the other person said that. The problem is there's also an expectation that the commission come up with some factual statements. So I'm not saying that it should either be all forensic or narrative, but I think that's really important to think of striking a balance. Synergy with other truth and justice initiatives is crucial. Of course, that takes more than a commission. Courts should do their jobs. But I'm putting it out there. And finally, the commission should get creative to direct media attention. Typically, unless the commission does or says something really dramatic, important, silly, funny, the media don't pay attention. These are seen as sort of relatively isolated intramural debates inside the parliament. And so I think future commissions, if there is ever going to be a future commission on democracy and human rights, should get creative. Now, finally, I'm leaving some websites of interest from sort of the human rights community in Turkey that have English websites. This is by no means an exhaustive list or anything like that, but it could be a good start if you're interested in transitional justice or human rights for Turkey. So thank you very much.